Midnight Gospel, Season 1, Episode 1, Taste of the King. This is a very unique show, a very short-lived Netflix series that animates a pre-existing podcast, but brings the people who were on the show back on to record some additional lines to fit a visual narrative that goes along with the podcast. This one, he interviews Dr. Drew, who in this world is a president who's dealing with the zombie apocalypse. So you get a lot of scenes of them talking about, like, I'd say the main topic of this episode is drug use, or like which drugs are good drugs or bad drugs. Like, as Dr. Drew says, he doesn't believe in like such a thing as a bad drug. He kind of a weird thing to just point out. If you watch the episode, you understand the context of that. But it's a very interesting show. Midnight Gospel is one of those ones where I love it, but I also have as someone who has a hard time focusing. Like, my God, it like with how intriguing the visuals are and how complex the conversations get, I definitely have a very hard time following sometimes, but I'm still always enjoying it. But like, there's like either I get so enthralled with the conversation that like when I pay attention to the animation again, I'm like, wait, how did we get here? What are the characters doing here now? Or I get so like, I'm paying so much attention to the animation where I have to like kind of look, like take a step back and be like, wait, what are they talking about again? But that's just my experience. Chris, what's your experience with this being your first time watching this one?
When you mentioned the show, I thought it was going to be more like Fritz the Cat, right? Because Ralph Bakshi liked to use conversations in his movies sometimes, or mainly in Fritz the Cat.
Yeah.
As a background kind of thing, and that's what I thought this would be. But it seems like it's more of Tales from the Trip, you know?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen that show?
I haven't. I almost thought you were saying that, like, metaphorically for a second. I didn't know that was actually a show.
Yeah, Tales from the Trip is a show about celebrities or influencers that have had a trip. Not even a bad one, just a trip, and, you know, how it went. And I'm only comparing these two because this one talks about drugs, so that's like it. That's the only reason why I compare this.
Is it animated too?
Yeah, it's animated, but like I feel like this one's more than like one is kind of just telling a story. This one is so much more than that. So
yeah, it's trying to balance its own narrative with the podcast, and it is interesting how they do it. Like I said, I think they both complement each other well, even if I do have a hard time focus on it. Like, it's more interesting having both the visuals and the conversation there than just having one or the other.
Yeah, I think the thing I like the most about this is that the animation for me isn't too distracting. Like, there's cute moments, but like the conversation, but both of them are so damn strong, right? The conversation's strong enough to be on its own, and so is the animation. Mm-hmm. And I enjoy that. I also feel like this is super relatable because like the time that we were growing up, that we kind of had the residue of the war of drugs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we kind of got to see a perception change a little bit. And I think that that's interesting, because episodes like these wouldn't be made if that perspective didn't change. And I think that this is...
Yeah.
I think it's also just an interesting perspective on drugs in general, you know?
Yeah, weed was very, like, I mean, looked at very harshly. It's, like, pretty widely accepted now. Like, I mean, it's not legal everywhere per se, but we're heading down that path.
Yeah, it's funny, because, like, I don't know how much you want to get into this, and I don't know how much is going to get into the episode. But, like...
No, go for it.
It's funny because, like, as a person that I am, when they were talking about... Sorry, Grandma, if you watch this. You always find the stuff I'm in, so I am sorry. But a lot of my life decisions, or big ones, have been coming from a influence of marijuana. I don't know how YouTube handles this.
I do,
but
no, I mean, I think it's fine.
Okay, but a lot of decisions of, because they brought up that sometimes when you have a overdose on it, you have to deal with the self that you don't like. You know, it pushes you towards that, and I've had that so many times. That's kind of why I'm on the path now that I'm at in life.
They talk a lot about like like how it can bring in like some paranoid thoughts or negative emotions, but how it can also be like something that's worth reflecting on. Like a lot of the time you are just genuinely paranoid.
Yeah.
But other times it's like, oh, there actually is something to consider there. You know, once you're like all sobered up, like he uses drinking too much as an example. But they also just kind of get into like, you know, negative thoughts in general and how a lot of people try, the second they start to have them, they try to avoid them.
Yeah.
When sometimes it's good to acknowledge them because it can like lead to either self-improvement or just addressing something that needs to get addressed.
For me, it's been mostly like self-improvement because there's a lot of stuff that I didn't like about myself and all that jazz. But
you specifically have gone through some pretty big changes in the last year.
Oh, so. Definitely, yeah. I just and unfortunately, it's because of that shit. But but this.
But I do think there's. I do
continue.
think that's a good. I was gonna say I do think there's something good. Go ahead, finish what you were gonna say.
But this episode hits really hard. I didn't expect it to go that way. I just thought it was gonna be some wacky little cartoon, you know, about what that happens to be a podcast, like a D&D cartoon, but instead it's people talking about real shit, and I'm like, okay, I'm here for the ride.
Yeah, like I'm all for like responsible drug use. Weed's fun. Like I do agree with that whole mindset of it. Like I think most of the time for me, it's just you kind of sit down and you're easily entertained. I don't have any like too deep of thoughts while I'm smoking, but thoughts that went somewhere have definitely come from it. You know, I do think people can get really creative when they're on it too, because I don't know, like I do think it can open your mind up a little bit. Not a lot. I think again, most of the time, if you like read something back that you wrote when you were stoned, it's going to be stupid.
Yeah.
But like sometimes something gets out. Sometimes because you're in a different state of mind. You're thinking of stuff that you wouldn't normally think about.
Yeah.
I think it's how a lot of people, just like, you know, when people drink, they're a lot more competent.
Yeah.
And that can be a bad thing too. Like they can always be a bad thing, but sometimes it's a good thing. Sometimes it makes you open up about something that you needed to get off your chest, but you were too nervous in a normal state to do.
Yeah.
I've known people who've taken shrooms and they've explained it as like almost like a life-changing experience for them. Like it opens up parts of themselves that they didn't even know were there, you know?
Yeah.
It makes them feel like connected with the world or helps them understand themselves better. I have not fucked with shrooms because I had a bad acid trip and I'm afraid of anything but weed at this point.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm sorry.
But I definitely am open to it eventually. I need to be in the right I need to be in the right state of mind. I can't still be working in retail.
I love how this is the episode where the person that talks about retro video games and Spiny Norman talk about drugs. I love how this is how.
Hey, it's a perfect show for that, right?
Yeah, I just love that. That's the thing that keeps tripping me up about this episode. is that we kind of do get to peel back a little bit. What I was gonna say is that I have taken... This is a show that I feel like a lot of people, or at least this episode, is an episode that I feel like a lot of people should watch because it might open them up a little bit more to the idea of not drug usage, but understanding, I guess, drug usage. Because a lot of people just go, nope, never have, never will. And that's the thing that's great about media, right? Is that media puts you in a different perspective, and I think cartoons like this are necessary, right?
Yeah.
So that they can give people better perspective instead of them just going, oh, weed's bad, the end, you know.
I think it's also just a great conversation because you do have two people who, like, these two clearly don't see eye to eye entirely on the subject, but they are able to sit down and have the conversation. It never turns into, like, petty insults being thrown back at each other. Like, they fully embrace the conversation. And that's how you get a really interesting conversation. You know, you do kind of go past a comfort zone. You do kind of talk about something where you might not have the popular opinion, but you talk about it civilly. You know, I think that they pulled that off really well in this episode. And but obviously, it initially comes from the podcast. Funny enough, this is like episode 142 of the podcast.
Oh, damn.
And the final episode of the season is the 40th episode of the podcast, so they really do kind of pick and choose the order they want to go in. Yeah, like the finale, like was recorded, you know, years before the one with Dr. Drew was recorded, but they still make it work really well. Go ahead.
That's kind of the cool thing about this show is that it's kind of it's a cool thing for the person that made this to look back at, because they had a show about their podcast. Like, of course, they can always look back at their podcast, but like, this is awesome. I think this is the dream if you have a podcast, really.
Oh, yeah, I mean, yeah. Like, being able to have these conversations animated, and I think some of the guests they've had on definitely help with that. I mean, God, if they got a season 2, they had Dan Harmon on for an episode. They could do an episode with that. Sadly, the Netflix pulled the plug on the show after one season, and I don't think it was that big of a hit. I knew a few people who enjoyed it, but I think that some people saw it and like, oh, it's from the creator of Regular Show, but it's an adult show, and they got really excited for it. But then when it was like an animated podcast, because I didn't know that going into the show either. I started watching, I was like, oh, is this a fucking podcast? But I enjoyed it. I was completely fine with that. I think for some people that might be a turnoff, just because, maybe they wanted something more narrative based. With that being said, I do think it's hilarious what they like add in, because they had this like very, they had this conversation about drug use and meditation and realizing things about yourself, and meanwhile they just occasionally throw in lines about the zombie apocalypse.
They have a whole ass song about the zombie apocalypse.
Yeah, I love like they're like in a different mental state when they're zombies and realize they're all happier.
The thing that's really funny is my dumbass was like, when they had a zombie song, I'm like, oh, cool, it's a song about succumbing to death and understanding that that's another part. And I'm like, no, you're overthinking this shit.
I mean, I'd say hold on to thoughts like that, though, because I think sometimes when a show is just kind of throwing weird stuff at you like that, I think that you're supposed to just kind of let your mind go wherever you want with it.
Oh no, it's a fun thought, but like I don't know if that's what they're going for.
I'm sure there's a great chance that it isn't, but I also like, what are they going for?
Yeah, right.
I think you're supposed to have fun with it is the bottom line.
Oh, yeah.
I think that just some smaller details to talk about before we wrap this one up, but color palette for the show is fucking amazing.
Oh yeah,
I love the style. The animation is like, it's simple. They're very simple character designs, but the way they move is very detailed. They really do get creative with the show. It's really well made. This is the creator of Adventure Time, so I think that that kind of helped give the show a decent budget to make this. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it definitely looks like some money went into this one. It looks fantastic.
Yeah.
I think that I love the details of what they did with Dr. Drew's character, though, where he can like barely walk in a straight line. Like, he keeps falling over like a little kid learning to walk for the first time. I also just love how like deep and professional his voice sounds as he's like shooting a fucking gun off constantly and abusing his secretary.
Yeah. I just love the attention to detail that they put into this, because I feel like the thing that's fun is that it's very clear that the president is short, right? Yeah. And even when he has an opportunity to be taller, he takes it, and it doesn't work out, and I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, he tries to wear, like, the fucking zombie's legs, and, like, it just starts, like, falling apart as he's walking, and he's like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
I love it because they mix it in with our main character still having his conversation, then it's just like a little side thing. He's just kind of muttering, like, oh, come on. Like, there's so many little moments like that where a character just, like, makes a noise or mutters something that, like, to blend it in with the setting better, and it works really well.
It makes it outstanding.
Yeah, it makes it more believable that they're actually having this conversation while wandering through this world.
And, I think that's those little touches are what makes it, right? Because if they didn't, it would just sound like a podcast, not a show.
Yes. So. Yeah, they did a great job blending the two together. Yeah, I love this show. I'm a little disappointed that there was never a season 2, but I also kind of understand why. I think it's also like, these are 8 really solid episodes. It works as a project. The final episode of season 1, which we're gonna get to next, is, like, in my opinion, a great finale for the show. So I still would have said you could do more. Like, you could do a season 2 still, but where they ended it off, like, it's okay where it's over. Great show. Highly recommend it to anyone. Chris, anything else to say about it?
Nope, that's it.
All right, on to the next one.